Hello there, William here again, and welcome to this, my sixth outing with Paul Howard's fluting jig. Now this week it's going to be a very short video, a big size of relief there from some people, mainly because I've had 3 commissions to get out of the way this week. Okay then, so this week's project, I'm planning on producing a fluted pot where the flutes actually pass all the way through the piece, so there's a lot of air gaps in the piece. Now I've found this piece of dusty old elm, which is obviously something I started and never finished some time ago, so I don't have to turn up anything new for this. I'm going to use this as is. As I recall, I finished it with sanding sealer and Yorkshire grit and called it a day. So what I've got to do then is to hollow this out, take the measurements, use my spreadsheet to work out what size router bit I need and the number of iterations, and then see what happens. Okay, going to use a Forstner bit now to drill to the bottom of the piece. I'm going to need to change over halfway through to use an extension piece to achieve this. Okay, now I need to hollow the piece out to about a uniform 5mm thick. Primarily I'm going to use Simon Hope's mini hollowing tool for this task. It's a great little tool, and it's really surprising how much material that little 6mm cutter can shift. I don't use carbide tools very often, but I do have a set of Glen Teagle's excellent carbide tools, and occasionally they get me out of trouble. On this occasion I found it was very useful for getting a nice even finish on the inside of this piece. Having got the hollowing satisfactory, I just need to sand it down now to about 400 and seal it with some sanding sealer. Okay, so we've loaded up our spreadsheet. I'm looking to use here a 12.7mm core box cutter, and the smallest radius is in fact 45mm. This gives us a working circumference of slightly under 283mm. Quick check here, the iteration guide, we need to be somewhat less than 20, so looking across here, 18 leaves us a gap of 3mm, or we can go to 16, which leaves us a gap of 5mm, which I think is, considering this as a training piece, is going to be much safer. So we'll go for 16 iterations, which is every third hole on the 48 position holes on the index plate. Okay, so now I've marked the holes on the index plate with a green Sharpie to make sure I get it right, and I've mounted the piece back into the chuck on the lathe and made sure it's tight. I've restricted the movement of the router using some battens which I've screwed to the base plate, and mounted the 12.7mm cutter into the router and lined it up centrally. So having completed my numerous safety checks, we can now begin routing the flutes. as you can see here, the routing is nice and tidy, but it's not quite breaking through towards the top of the piece. So in fact I stopped here and reset the batten that restricts the depth of cut to cut it a little bit deeper towards the top of the piece. But even after resetting it, it's still not entirely breaking through towards the top of the piece, but I've decided I can take that out with a Dremel afterwards with no issues. Okay, we can see what's happened here is that the web between the two flutes was too weak to withstand it, and actually it's snapped here. However, since somebody dubbed me in my last video as the King of Recovery, we'll make a recovery. Okay then, so I've put a bit of CA glue in the crack, which was quite clean, and put a clamp on it. And in the meantime, I'm going to try and clean up some of the fluting, particularly where it's thinned out at the ends, with a Dremel with a small sanding drum on it. Okay then, here it is, a open fluted pot in elm. Aesthetically, it's not firing my rockets. I believe that the proportioning is wrong, and I would have been better off actually having a thicker web, and in fact a web approximately the same size as the width of the router bit would have been better. I made a good recovery from the break, I think. Maybe I am the king of recovery. Anyway, I'm just kind of wondering now, having made this object, what in fact it could be used for. Let me think about this. So that's what the dimple in the bottom of the pot was for. It was for the thirsty ferret.